Okay, today we're going to talk about cells and their environment, and we are going to talk about cell communication. Before we go on, yesterday you did an osmosis lab with diffusion. You put iodine in some water solution, and you had a bag full of starch. No, the iodine is smaller than the water molecule because the iodine dissolved in the water molecule, and the pores of the membrane were smaller than the starch. The starch wasn't able to travel out of the bag because you saw the bag get black, which means the iodine traveled in, but the water stayed probably a yellowish color. That indicates that the iodine, which you put into the water, stayed in the water, but could diffuse into the membrane with the water molecules. The starch was too large, so it stayed in there. So it should have been in size, order, iodine, water, membrane, starch. The starch was too big. It needed a carrier protein to move into and out of. It needs more active transport, and you guys only had passive. And so there is why the starch did not move out of the cell. So let's talk about cell communications. You can pause this after this question. I want you to talk about how can you communicate with the people in this room. What are the methods and forms that we have today that are able to send messages from one person to the next? Go ahead and talk about that right now. Pause the video, make a big list. All right, so like us, cells are able to send signals. Cells communicate according to activities. Now they send signals a little different than us. You probably said things like cell phones, call people, text them, Instagram, Facebook. There's a ton of ways that we send signals. We, however, unlike a cell, can do many forms. Cells will typically form signals in just a few ways. Their signals, or the way they send them, is through chemical responses. Some cells are able to communicate membrane to membrane, and they're touching each other. But for the most part, cells will send a chemical signal produced by a signaling cell. It will then travel to a target, or what we know as a target cell. Okay, so here's what we do know about targets. So the neighboring cells can communicate directly through their cell membranes. That's if they are touching one another. So they can actually talk back and forth. Now, we have short distance signals and long distance signals. Your short distance signals are just typically acting locally. It could be through cell membranes because you're touching each other, or you can send chemical impulses just by your orientation, but you're really close by. So it's like talking to the people at your lab station. A long distance signal is like sending an email to somebody inside of another classroom while you're in my classroom. Don't be doing that. And so that long distance signal is traveling via like hormones or nerve impulse. Now hormones can be released throughout your entire body, and so they can travel everywhere. They travel typically through the bloodstream. They can be released by different portions of the brain, and so they will travel and they'll affect your mood and how you're feeling. Now, yes, it is true. Women, we get a little bit of different hormones every 28 days, and that's because we have a release of hormones called estrogen and progesterone, which are released into our bodies based on our menstrual cycle. And so that does change how we feel. Men, you have a chemical called testosterone that's released in your system, which changes how you feel. If you ever heard of the term roid rage, if you have an excess amount of testosterone, it actually makes you more aggressive, angry, and so those things can also happen. An excess of progesterone can make us, well, we get a little moody, we typically cry. It happens, what it is. The other one is nerves. Nerves send signals via electrical impulses, and so that will travel from one spot all the way to either your spinal cord or your brain, depending on what it is. Now, if it's a reflex reaction, it will travel. So if you have like your knee lock reflex, if you hit that patellar ligament on your knee, it will kick your knee up. That doesn't go to your brain. That only goes to your spinal cord. and it's a reflex, such as if you put your hand on a hot surface, the reflex is pull your hand back right away. Well, that's because it is simply that. It's a reflex to that. And so those are only going to the spinal cord and transmitting back to the brain. We don't want to take a whole lot of time. We're preventing injury with those ones. The ones that go to your brain, so like if somebody comes up and like touches your arm, you know they're touching your arm even though if your eyes are closed, because you can feel that sent by electrical impulses all the way to the brain, and you can react accordingly to that. And so those are your long distance signals, so traveling over a long period of time. We also have environmental signals. These are typically molecules that are coming from outside of the body. These are outside sources. Light is a huge one. The sun. The sun will actually affect not only plants by having them move, it's called phototropism, and they'll actually move based on the plant, the location of there. And so we also see that humans are affected by this as well, and we actually will have mood changes based on the amount of sun that we have. People will actually get depressed if they don't have enough sunlight. Sunlight for us releases endorphins, which makes us happy. So how do we receive these signals? So typically there's going to be these receiving proteins. These receiving proteins, their job is to respond to the signals as they possibly can. Now, remember, these signals are being sent throughout the entire body. So all these hormones are moving crazy. So the receptor proteins will typically have a binding site, and that's seen right here. Oops. This binding site right here will only fit a certain hormone. That allows for other hormones to be going out throughout the entire body, but you're not getting a chemical reaction every time they bind where they're not supposed to bind, which could make us crazy moody. These are only binding in those specific spots. So it kind of fits in like a lock and key. And so these receptor proteins are very specific binding sites for this, and they'll only bind to the hormone or the signal that matches that specific site. And so it allows our hormones or signals to get to the proper spot and not just anywhere. So a receptor protein can be located in the cell membrane. It's usually all the way through the cell membrane. And so you can pause this. What type of proteins are found that go completely through the cell membrane and are always there? Is it an integral protein or a peripheral protein? Please look that up. You can pause that right now and answer that question. Okay, once at the binding site, the signal molecule of the receptor protein, it will change its shape. So we can see at the bottom here, it's no longer square, it's turned circular. It's activating that receptor protein to send a signal in response to that hormone. That allows for the cell to change based on the signal that's there. And so once it's there, it will affect that. It relays it into the cytoplasm, and then the cell can act accordingly to that signal that it has. So we also have response to signals. So here's your three main responses. You got a permeability change, enzyme reactions, and a secondary messenger. So once those, the signal protein goes and binds to the receptor protein, we will typically see these reactions occurring. So what's a permeability change? A permeability change is basically changing the plasma membrane. Remember, the plasma membrane is semi-permeable. It allows things to go into and out of. However, in this case, in a permeability change, it might open a water channel so it's open all the way. It might close a channel so it doesn't go. Remember, channels are like pores. It might activate carrier enzyme or carrier proteins to start going through active transport to move molecules into and out of the cell. It's changing that. So a nerve impulse will open ion channels to allow signals to be received into. Those are examples of permeability change. Then we have enzyme activity. Remember, an enzyme is a protein that is a catalyst. It triggers metabolic reactions. And so you're going to have a chemical reaction occurring. So basically with an enzyme, something is binding to that protein. It's releasing that enzyme, allowing that enzyme to find its activation site, so it can bind to a substrate to start a chemical reaction occurring within the body. And then the other one is a secondary messenger. This acts as a signal molecule within a cell and causes a change in the cytoplasm or the nucleus. And so this molecule will generate specific substances to attach to the receptors on the outside of the cell membrane, which will produce this cellular change. And so this one will actually cause a change within a change. So once this secondary messenger is activated, it will actually change the chemistry inside of the cell. Now, this can be a good thing because now it can react against different things like bacteria entering the cell or a toxin coming in. So this can be a very good thing to make sure that we are protecting our cells. So, again, little recap. Make sure that you understand that signals are sent by signal cells, which then go to a target cell. That target cell will then transfer that information over so that we have the right response, either a permeability change, an enzyme reaction, or a secondary messenger. One of the things too with this, these signals, if they get messed up or sent to the wrong spot or sent too fast because of outside chemical responses, such as you're taking in substances like caffeine, which can speed up some of these activities because it's a stimulant, or you're taking a downer or depressant and it's actually slowing down your responses. These can be really harmful to your body if taken wrong because your body doesn't know how to react to them, and these responses slow your reaction time, which could actually lead to an accident or possibly the loss of these signals being sent, which could maybe cause your death. So it's really important that we don't take too many outside substances to alter our body's chemistry, because you really can do some harm, and some of it, like drug intake, can be irreversible. Okay, have a good weekend.